Hi, welcome. I'm Ed Wasserman, Dean of the Graduate School of Journalism here at UC Berkeley. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first of four webinars, this one featuring David Barstow. David is a four-time Pulitzer Prize winner and head of our investigative reporting program. For the next 30 minutes, David will talk to you about what it's like to study investigative reporting here at Berkeley, and then he'll take your questions. So it's with pride and pleasure that I give you David Barstow at UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism.
Thanks, Ed. Welcome, everyone. Um, so yes, my name is David Barstow, and I just actually came to Berkeley a couple months ago after spending about 20 years working in the investigative unit of the New York Times. Um, and uh, and I've come here to Berkeley because I believe so deeply in investigative reporting, and my goal is to try to persuade as many of you as possible to pick up the torch of investigative reporting. And so I run a program at Berkeley called the Investigative Reporting Program, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what that program does and how you could potentially take advantage of it if you decide to come to Berkeley. The investigative reporting program was actually started about 14 years ago by a good friend of mine named Lowell Bergman, who for many years worked for 60 Minutes, and he also did documentaries for Frontline. And his idea was that the best way to teach investigative reporting is to invite students to actually participate in investigative projects. And that is exactly my philosophy as well. And so my objective with the students here at the journalism school is to try to pull as many of them as possible into investigative reporting projects that are underway in my program, the Investigative Reporting Program. And we do it basically in two different ways. One is I have a staff of professional journalists who are actually involved in a bunch of really ambitious reporting projects on a whole variety of topics and subjects, from police wrongdoing to, say, for example, the sexual harassment of farm workers and office workers, to any number of other projects. And this year, we have offered research jobs to 34 students from the Graduate School of Journalism, pairing them up with reporters in my program on very ambitious investigative stories. And those student research assistants who are paid will spend an entire school year working alongside the reporters and producers on my staff to actually produce, I think, very important and impactful investigative stories. So one of the ways that you could expect to be involved at the investigative reporting program at Berkeley is you could apply to become one of those student research assistants, and actually work side by side with myself and others in the investigative reporting program on projects that are currently underway. But we also want to create a path for you to actually come up with your own story ideas and pursue those stories and be supported in doing those stories for a good length of your time here at Berkeley. And so what we're doing is I teach an investigative reporting class in the springtime to first year students, and the objective of that class is I'm trying to basically download to those students everything that I have learned over the course of 33 years of being an investigative reporter, from story conception to reporting tactics, reporting strategies, how do you get people to talk? How do you develop sources? How do you analyze and gather and exploit documents? How do you begin thinking about telling the story, right on through the final fact checking? And over the course of the semester, then, in addition to basically trying to download everything I possibly know about investigative reporting, at the same time, what I'm asking of the students who are in that class is I'm asking them to prepare really robust story pitches, which is not just like what the idea is or what the hypothesis is, but also it's a pitch that describes um, what else is already known about the subject, what are the potential policy implications of this story, who are the potential human sources for us to try to approach to help us tell this story, what documents might we seek, even if it involves doing public records requests or fighting in court to get those documents, and a little bit about how they intend to actually tell the story. And so from that class, we will then pick basically the best half of those story ideas. And those students will be invited to participate in a year-long seminar in their second year, where myself and Professor Geeta Anand, who's the director of the Investigative Reporting Program and is also, like myself, an alum of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and herself an amazing investigative reporter. The two of us will work with second year students for the course of the year to actually turn those story ideas into published, robust, important, impactful, investigative projects, regardless of whether they're in print or it's a podcast or it's a documentary film or it's something else that we haven't yet invented. We are trying to create a pipeline, a way for students themselves to conceive of and have ownership of investigative projects as the kind of capstone of their time here at Berkeley. The basic thought behind this is that we want, more than anything, for you all to have a project, a story, whatever it is, published in, in whether it's in the New York Times or whether it's on PBS or whether it's in a local news outlet, whatever it is, we want you to have those stories done and a kind of a clip, an example of what you're capable of doing, so that every editor in the country can look at that and say, I absolutely have to hire this person. Number one. And number two, we believe deeply that if you get involved, if you actually have ownership and you are the driving force and you take on the responsibility of a significant piece of investigative reporting, if you go through that process, you are going to be hooked to investigative reporting, which is, in my mind, is something that is absolutely critical to the future of this country. I travel the world a lot, and the one thing I notice, especially in countries where things are really falling apart and breaking down, the one thing I notice is that those countries where things are falling apart and breaking down and corruption is rampant, the one thing that kind of connects all of them is that they have done everything possible to end and eliminate the idea of investigative reporting. And so what we're trying to do is we're actually trying to keep that spirit, that tradition alive, not just in this country, but we're also really hopeful to reach students who are coming from around the world and who are attending the journalism school here. We want them to go back, right, to the countries where they came from and really carry this torch of investigative reporting proudly and effectively in the places where they're from. And so I think that 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 I think now especially we're at a time in the history of this country where at times it seems like the very notion of like truth itself, that there's a knowable truth, that there are facts that are verifiable facts, that idea itself often feels under assault. And investigative reporting is the antidote to that. Investigative reporting is the thing that answers that, especially when it's done well, when it's done robustly. And so part of why I've come to Berkeley is I feel strongly that truth itself needs recruits. And I've come here to recruit folks into this craft of investigative reporting that I've basically devoted my entire adult life to. So that's enough of me talking. I think it would be great to open this up to questions. If you have any questions about investigative reporting or the New York Times or about Berkeley or whatever it is, I'm here for as long as you all have questions.
Right on. Thank you, David.
You're welcome.
I'll introduce myself quickly. My name's Sam Goldman. I'm a recent alum and a freelance journalist here in the Bay Area. And one of our first questions, someone was curious a little bit more about how the investigative reporting program interacts with the wider curriculum at the J School. Students are asked for their primary interest on applications, and investigative isn't one of those options. So is there an explicit track for investigative, and can you graduate with a concentration in investigative reporting?
Yeah. So we're definitely trying to make investigative reporting a bigger part of the core curriculum at Berkeley. And one of the things that we're absolutely trying to do is to work very closely with, for example, the professors who are teaching documentary filmmaking. My history is as a print journalist, and but what I can bring to the table is I can bring, deep knowledge and experience in investigative reporting. Well, we want to pull that together with the folks who are phenomenal filmmakers to figure out basically how the investigative reporting background that I have can be pulled in together and enjoined with the either whether it's podcasting or it's making a film or it's anything else, right? We want the students to actually get the best of both worlds. So we want you to get the best of the cutting edge documentary filmmaking storytelling skills, but we also want you to have all of the support you need to do great investigative reporting. And so I think the way to think about it is if you're coming here, you're going to have plenty of space in your course selection to actually tap into both threads. So let's say you are a budding filmmaker, and you know that Berkeley is especially distinctive as having been a place with an amazing, I think the best documentary journalism program in the country, maybe even in the world. And you want to tap into that, but you also are really interested in investigative reporting. You can actually tap into both here. You can spend tons of time learning the craft of documentary filmmaking, but you can also spend a lot of time in the investigative reporting program, deepening your skills when it comes to like interviewing, it comes to public records requests. How do you deal with data? How do you deal with computers, computer assisted reporting? This is a place where there's plenty of space to get both. You kind of get two for one.
Right. Katie is wondering what kind of legal help there is for students who, say, experience or they want guidance, for example, if a government agency wants to refuse a public records request, and what kind of legal advice can students find here?
So, Katie, that's a terrific question. And it's a question that we confront all the time because we run into this all the time. We ask for records and agencies say no. The investigative reporting program is fortunate to have terrific, top-notch legal help. It comes in a couple of different forms. We have some absolutely superb pro bono lawyers who are local, who we rely on not just for public records litigation, but we also rely on them for the complex legal work that happens before you publish a major investigative story, where you're vetting the story and you're making sure the story is legally airtight. We also have a relationship with legal clinics at some of the UC law schools who are also available and eager, actually, to take on public records litigation on our behalf. So we probably have, right now, presently, I know of at least 3 different legal efforts that are underway right now out of the investigative reporting program that are aimed at basically prying loose public records from reluctant government officials.
Hmm, interesting. Elise is wondering about business models that can support investigative journalism in the future. And what do you think are the most promising models that will support publications focused on investigative reporting? And are there any particular examples of innovative publications that are redefining how long form or in-depth reporting is being funded?
It's another amazingly good question. So on one level, we're kind of in a golden age of investigative reporting right now. I mean, there has been phenomenal work that's being done, not just at the New York Times and the Washington Post, but at places like ProPublica, which is one of the probably the premier not-for-profit investigative reporting shop. And there are a number of others that have sprouted out up since, that are funded primarily by donations, by foundations, and so on one level, the investigative reporting that's happening right now in this country is kind of like at the best that I have seen it in my lifetime. At the same time, there is a terrible problem, which is, so far, as we've all witnessed, there has been a collapse of local reporting at local newspapers and local news organizations. And the reason why that is so impactful on investigative reporting in particular is that the way the media ecosystem traditionally grooms investigative reporters is, it really starts at the local level. Someone like me, I started at a little newspaper in upstate New York, and that's really where I began learning how to do investigative reporting. And my first investigative projects were terrible. I mean, they were just like well-meaning, but terrible. But I started learning how to do it. And then I went to a medium-sized newspaper in Florida, and I learned some more. And that ecosystem is kind of what produced traditionally investigative reporters in the United States. And that ecosystem is sort of broken down right now. So one of the reasons why I've come to Berkeley is actually to try to address that very problem. So because it's difficult now for new reporters at small newspapers or news outlets or TV stations to actually get the experience of investigative reporting because of cutbacks and other problems, this is a place where we can actually give you the experience of trying to become an investigative storyteller. This is a space, right, where we can kind of fill the void that's been left behind by the cutbacks to local news in particular. And we can actually help groom the future generations of investigative reporters. You can come out of this, you can spend 2 years here and even longer working on investigative stories that then you can demonstrate to employers or potential employers that, you know what, you've actually done really significant investigative reporting. And I think that is one of the most exciting things for me about coming here, is the chance to try to pull in, especially I mean, the thing that I think I care about almost as much as anything else is pulling in especially the most diverse group of young investigative reporters I possibly can into investigative reporting. It's been a long-standing problem in investigative reporting in this country that it has been far too long and for far too many years in far too many places. It's been the preserve basically of white guys who look like me. And that's actually not good. That's terrible. And the reason why it's terrible is because it means that we as a country are missing really important investigative stories because we don't have the diversity that is enabling us to see those stories. Berkeley is the place to actually begin changing that in a big way, because Berkeley has an incredible diversity of students coming here. And I'm, of the 30 plus student research assistants that we've hired at the Investigative Reporting Program, I am so proud to say that 29 of them are women and over half of them are people of color. And that is a tremendous opportunity here to actually to make a difference in a really big and important way in the future of investigative reporting in the United States.
Right, right on. Derek has a question that I think a lot of people who are new to investigative reporting are probably wondering, and it's a great question. How much of an investigative journalist's time is spent outside the office, building relationships, finding sources, versus in the office doing desk research and writing?
That's a really good question. So the thing that I preach more than anything else to my students is actually on the importance of getting out of your office. Um, you know, the it's tricky now because we have so much access to information from our phones and our computers that it can be tempting to basically sit in your office all day long and doing research. But great investigative stories, that's not where they come from. Great investigative stories actually come from getting out, cultivating sources, meeting people, building trust, and actually mixing it up with the world. Um, and uh, and so one of the things that I'm pushing all of our students to do who are involved in investigative reporting is to actually, you know, I don't want to see you at your desk. I want to see you out there meeting people, cultivating sources, and thinking deeply and exploring deeply the world that that you might be interested in. So I think, yes, there's obviously a big part of investigative reporting also involves spending lots of hours going through documents. And I love documents. I'm one of those weird nerds who, if I see a box of documents, my heart starts racing a little bit faster. Um, but really, like, the most fun of being an investigative reporter is this the act of, you figured out whose door you want to knock on, and you've thought really hard about what are the first words out of my mouth in order to get this person to trust me enough to let me in. And the thing that I live for, the thing that really makes me excited as a reporter, is actually those 15 seconds at someone's front door while they're looking me in the eye and I'm looking them in the eye, and I'm trying to convince them that it's really important for them to let me in. That is the magic of investigative reporting.
Yeah, wow. To kind of piggyback on the idea of getting out there and talking to folks,
Mm-hmm.
Jed was wondering, will students have the opportunity to pursue stories that are in other parts of the country, or will they need to be local to California?
Not just other parts of the country, but other parts of the world. What we care about isn't about stories that are just California or even San Francisco. What we care about and what we're looking to support are just great investigative story ideas. So I have two students who just returned from Louisiana. They spent a week and a half doing reporting in Louisiana for an investigative project that's underway right now. We have stories that are bubbling up, not just from around California, but and not just in other parts of the country, but we have a number of stories that are bubbling up internationally. And so one of the things that we do at the Investigative Reporting Program is we actually spend a lot of time fundraising, raising money from people who want to support investigative reporting. And what we're doing with that money, it's not just paying the professional reporters who work in the program, but that money is also there to finance the reporting, to finance actually going out, going to a place like Louisiana, paying for the hotel rooms, paying for the airfare, paying for all of that stuff so that you can do real investigative reporting. I mean, that's a hard truth of this line of work, is that investigative reporting costs money. And so we're raising money totally above and separate and apart from from tuition and things like that, in order to actually enable you as students here to do real work. So there's absolutely no geographic limits on you. Really, what we're looking for is the quality of the idea and the robustness of your thought process and coming to that idea. And we're looking for a kind of clear, thought out plan of how you intend to attack that particular story. And if you have those ingredients, we're going to find a way to support you.
Right. There are a couple questions that go back to the idea that there aren't a lot of local papers who can help you climb the ladder.
Okay.
And could you talk a little bit more about what skills students gain from this program that they couldn't get, going straight maybe into to a newspaper or some sort of outlet that will allow them to do professional investigative reporting right off the bat?
I mean, that's the problem. That is the problem, is that it's harder and harder when you have smaller news outlets, whether it's a small town newspaper or it's a TV station in a smaller market or a radio station in a smaller market. The economic crisis of journalism in those places in particular has forced editors to so strip down their staffs that they don't have any room at all to take on any kind of investigative project that takes more than a day or two. And that's a crisis, right? That's a crisis, obviously, for those communities, but it's a longer term crisis for journalism in the United States. And I think what I think Berkeley can do is it can actually give you a space as a young journalist to really learn the craft of doing investigative reporting. And the thing I would say, and that this is something I really want to stress, investigative reporting is different. It is not like day-to-day journalism. I know some of you are already working as journalists, and I think those of you who are, what I'm saying to be true. Investigative reporting is different. It's a different set of demands. It's a different commitment. It's a different form of storytelling, and you're not going to get those skills in just doing the day in and day out kind of reporting, which is so important and so crucial, right? Covering City Hall, covering school boards, covering the police, all of that stuff is essential and important. And I did a lot of it, right? So I'm like a big proponent of it, but it's different than investigative storytelling. And that's the thing that takes time to figure out how to do it and do it well. It takes time actually to kind of discover your voice. What's the best voice for you? What is the kind of storyteller that you want to be? And it took me a long time to discover that for myself. It took me, I think the experience of especially working in a place, I worked at the St. Petersburg Times in Florida, and I was around writers who were like just amazing narrative storytellers. And that got me thinking that what I really am interested in is trying to basically fuse investigative reporting with narrative storytelling. And I basically have spent 33 years trying to figure out how to do that one thing. How do I tell great investigative narratives in print? But other people are going to have a different kind of voice. And part of the challenge of any young journalist is to actually discover which voice fits you best. And it may not be the investigative narrative voice. It may not be a print voice. It may be a voice that we haven't even yet imagined. I mean, one of the things that I'm really encouraging with the students that I have right now is to rethink investigative storytelling. I would love nothing more than for a Berkeley student to be the first student to figure out how to tell a great investigative story on like Instagram or something that we haven't even figured out yet. Because that's the way we need to reach, especially younger generations who might not want to read, a newspaper. They might be offended by the sight of a newspaper. And think that it's a sin against the environment. And I could see that, right? That makes sense to me. So one of the things that we think is exciting about Berkeley and investigative reporting is that it's the perfect laboratory to reinvent and rethink what it is to be an investigative storyteller.
Mhm. We have one more question for you
Okay.
this afternoon from Tamara. If you could do it all again, what kind of advice would you give to your younger self as you as you shape your career in investigative journalism?
Okay, first of all, everyone who asked a question, you have to become journalists because you're asking really good questions. Um, um, I think, that's a hard question to answer. I think, I think that for me, what I didn't quite realize when I started was what it would actually feel like to sort of pour your heart and soul into a story, to pour your heart and soul into a story about especially really powerful people who are doing things that they'd rather the world not know about, and what it actually feels like to relentlessly pull that story out of the mud. And one day you press a button and you hit that button and that world goes out, that story goes out to the world. And that's a profound experience. The I wrote a story for the New York Times that basically said that the President Trump had committed tax fraud. And it it was a very long story, 14,000 words. I worked 18 months on that story with two other reporters. And the act of hitting the button that published that story on the front page of the New York Times is a really profound feeling, because what you're doing in that moment is you're actually giving life to this thing we call the First Amendment, this thing that we call free speech. That act of 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 delivering 14,000 words of very hard truths to the reading public about the most powerful person in the world, that is something I didn't understand. I didn't understand what that would feel like, and the profoundness of that act when I first started out. So I wish I had a better sense of that when I started out.
Right, right. David Barstow, thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Sam.